Hello again! I hope everyone is surviving okay in this absolutely disrespectful July heat. It's miserable here in the southeastern US, but alas, we're probably all here to escape our real-life woes, so let's get into today's video. I needed a little break after last month's monstrous video, as it took me forever to make and I was feeling a little creature designed out this time around. So instead, I wanted to talk about some art purchases I've made over the past 2 years while working on a sketchbook spread here in the background. I'm going to be going over the main purchases I regret and the ones that I feel gave me the most bang for my buck. We're going to start with the regrets first, but before we do that, I just wanted to point out a little silver lining that applies to all of these things. That is, even though I did ultimately regret buying these things, I feel like buying them and getting to try them out firsthand contributed to me being able to figure out what works for me and what doesn't. I'm generally a cautious person, but sometimes I need to learn things the hard way. So these things were all learning experiences for me, which is valuable in and of itself. Also, just because I didn't find value in these things doesn't mean that someone else, such as yourself, wouldn't get a lot of use and joy out of them. So take my opinions with a grain of salt. Let's start with the most expensive thing on my regret list. That is this Huion Canvas GT221 tablet monitor that I bought back in 2018. It was on sale, but the purchase sent me back over $600, and I barely used it. It works great, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and even though it was expensive, it was still a really great value compared to the overpriced competitors like Wacom. It was definitely a huge upgrade from the regular non-display drawing tablets I had been used to up until that point. The pressure sensitivity is great, and I love the shortcut buttons on the sides. I've always struggled with non-display drawing tablets because I do not have enough brain cells to connect what my hand is doing on the work area to what's happening on the screen. Drawing directly on the canvas works better for me, but I got it at a weird transitional period in my art journey. At that time, I was bouncing back and forth between traditional and digital, and then ended up taking a little break from art as a whole as I got other aspects of my life together. I was also starting to realize that the more detailed digital art I was doing with complex backgrounds and lots of little painterly details was no longer appealing to me. Had I gotten this monitor earlier in my art journey, I probably would have used it a lot more than I did, but as of right now, it just functions as a second monitor for me. One thing I am grateful for, though, is that it helped me realize how much I dislike sitting at my desk, which led me to one of my favorite art purchases, which we'll get to in a little bit. I think this would actually be a worthwhile purchase for someone who enjoys desk work and having a huge drawing area to work in. It really is a great product, just not for me and where I'm at right now. Is it possible that my preferences will change in the future and I'll get more use out of it eventually? It could be, but for the past few years that I've had it, I don't think I've used it enough to justify what I paid for it. The next thing on my regret list are expensive and/or large sketchbooks. I know we all have a different opinion on what counts as an expensive sketchbook, but to me, if it's over $10, that's expensive. I really prefer sketchbooks that are $8 and below. I've also found that I don't like sketchbooks that are over the 5.5 by 8.5 inch range, and unfortunately for me, I've impulse bought a lot of them. One day I'll get through them, or at least that's what I tell myself to cope. But through my attempts to work in them, I found that big and expensive sketchbooks just take away some of the joy of creating things for me. With the expensive sketchbooks, I feel like I need to make everything really aesthetic and pretty to justify the cost. With the big ones, sitting down to work on a spread just takes forever, and knowing that makes me procrastinate when it comes to working in them. So they just collect dust. The last sketchbook I managed to complete was the small, super cheap one that I did a tour of a while back on the channel. I genuinely enjoyed working in that one because I didn't feel precious about the paper, and in the time it took me to do one spread in a large sketchbook, I could do 2 or 3 in that little one. I'm currently working through one of my 8x8 ELO sketchbooks, as you've seen in a few of my most recent sketchbook videos in this video, but y'all, it's taking me eons. I don't think I'm even halfway through. I'll go months without even touching it. Part of me feels like I need to finish it before I move on to the sketchbooks I prefer, but I know it's all in my head. I'll admit I really jumped on the ELO hype bandwagon back when they were really popular in the YouTube art community. I think they're really good quality sketchbooks, and obviously a lot of people enjoy them, but along with other pricey sketchbooks, they're just not for me. I will always stand cheap sketchbooks going forward. Can't beat cost effectiveness as well as the low pressure that goes along with it. The third thing on my list was another big money sink for both me and my parents: how to draw books, online one-off classes, and college art classes. Over the years, and especially in the years that I was first starting to take art seriously, I spent a nice chunk of change on how to draw type books and online classes. While I did get some value out of these, I now no longer think they're worth it with the wealth of free learning that's available online. I should clarify that I'm not talking about artist reference books for anatomy and whatnot here. I'm strictly talking about instructional material. A lot of the books and classes do have great content, but I just can't justify spending money on them when there's equally good material out there for free. And to be honest, I think the same thing applies to art school. Now, if you're someone who thrives off of the structure provided by material like that, by all means, go for it. That in and of itself might make it worth it for you. But for me personally, big regret, I would have been better off spending that money on art supplies for practicing on my own. Aside from the monetary loss, doing college art classes also cost a lot of time for something I feel taught me next to nothing. I don't remember anything from those classes except for all the unnecessary stress and pressure I felt while doing them. Maybe it's just my authority issues talking, but the college setting didn't work for me at all, and I found that I absorbed a lot more information when I pursued artistic growth on my own instead of someone trying to force me to do it their way for a grade. Of everything on my regret list, I'm probably the most salty about this one. And on to the fourth thing, which are art subscription boxes. I got hit hard by FOMO when a lot of art YouTubers were doing unboxing of these bad boys a few years ago. They seemed like so much fun, and I loved seeing what other people made with them. The art supplies seemed really cool, and it seemed like a good way to get to try supplies I wouldn't have thought to pick up otherwise. So I bought several different boxes and tried them out for a couple of months as a trial. Boy, was that underwhelming. I remember feeling like they had put all the fun stuff I would have been interested in previous boxes that had led me to give them a try in the first place, if that makes any sense. And then when I actually got a box myself, it was a bunch of boring stuff. I was expecting things like Copics and fun paints. Instead, two of the boxes I tried did almost the exact same theme, really close to each other, and I ended up with more graphite pencils than I could ever go through. Super disappointing. Other boxes only had one or two things I was actually interested in continuing to use, and I learned very quickly that subscription boxes ain't it. It was fun getting them as Happy Meal at first, but it started to dawn on me that paying $30 plus for a box when I wasn't going to use most of the supplies was a waste of my money. I canceled my subscriptions but continued to watch the unboxing videos. If I see a particular art supply that intrigues me, I'll just buy that one thing instead of dropping money on the entire box. Much more wallet friendly, and I don't end up with quite so much clutter in my supply collection. And the last thing on my regret list is paying for a Photoshop subscription for years in spite of there being many cheaper and even free options out there. I've been a Photoshop user for well over a decade and had already been using it for years when they moved over to a subscription model. I was pretty salty about it, but I did shell out for it on and off over the years because it was what I was used to. I tried alternatives like GIMP and Paint Tool SAI, but I kept going back to Photoshop because of its familiarity and all the things you could do with it that you couldn't do in other programs. In recent years, however, other programs have come out that are more on par with Photoshop that are way cheaper, like Clip Studio Paint, or free like Krita. I know Clip Studio Paint has a subscription version now too, but even that is only like $1 a month, and you can still buy a version of it for a one-time purchase as well. You just won't get the future updates with it, which I think is fair. But yeah, I paid for that subscription for quite a while, even though in the past 2 or 3 years I've barely used it. Recently, I've made the jump to Clip Studio Paint, and I can do pretty much everything on there that I used to use Photoshop for on my desktop computer. Y'all know I'm a Procreate girl when it comes to the iPad, but since that's not an option on my PC, I had to go with something else. Now that I've forced myself to get accustomed to another program, thinking back to all those months I paid for Photoshop just really, really hurts me. I wish I had made the leap sooner, as it would have saved me a lot of money. I've been able to edit all my shortcuts and such to how they were in Photoshop, and I have all my brushes from Photoshop on Clip Studio as well. The only thing I really miss are the layer styles in Photoshop that allow you to do things like stroke paths around text, which I haven't quite figured out in Clip Studio yet, but we'll get there, I'm sure. If you're just a hobby artist like me, and heck, maybe even if you're professional, I just don't think Photoshop is worth it. It's extremely overpriced in my humble opinion, especially with all the worthy competitors out there. Like, come on, Adobe. Okay, now we're on to my list of best purchases. Again, we're going to start with the most expensive, and that is the iPad Pro. And again, I will admit that my first iPad was a total FOMO buy after seeing so many artists using it with Procreate. At this point, I had already realized that I did not like sitting at a desk to make art, so I figured it was worth a try. The first iPad Pro I got was an older refurbished model, but it worked great and still works to this day. There was a bit of a learning curve for me, but as soon as I figured everything out and got used to Procreate, I was absolutely sold. The fact that it was so portable and I could just lay in my bed or sit on the couch and draw was just perfect for me. Before I got my iPad, I was also mainly doing my line work traditionally and scanning it in, but having the iPad motivated me to learn how to do my sketches and line work digitally. Now, digital is my preferred method for those things, and I've really been able to step up my digital art game in general by having it. I recently upgraded to the bigger 2022 version, I think, whatever the most recent version of the iPad Pro was in November of last year. That's what I have. That was a big purchase, even more than what I paid for my Huion tablet monitor, but I use this thing so much and I've gotten so much out of it that it was worth every penny to me. It also allowed me to pass my older iPad on to my husband, and now he's addicted to drawing too, so win-win for the both of us. I think the iPad Pro and Procreate are really worth the money if you're having to choose between digital media and the constant expense of traditional media. I definitely think the iPad is worth the investment. You will get so much mileage out of it, and it will eventually pay for itself with all the traditional media you won't have to buy. I truly believe it's made me a better artist just by its sheer convenience, allowing me to draw anywhere I want with essentially unlimited tools. There are many options for art programs you can use on the iPad Pro besides Procreate, but Procreate is so cheap and intuitive and overall a great program that I highly recommend it. Next is just another general category rather than a specific thing, but that is cheap art supplies. I mean like off-brand pencils, markers, crayons, things like that. Especially when it comes to sketchbooks, cheap art supplies are the holy grail. Just like with cheap sketchbooks, using cheap supplies just takes away a lot of the pressure and allows me to just play and figure out what media works together, what textures I like in the look of my art, etc. I don't have to feel bad about wasting them or feel like I've got to make high quality art with them. I can just enjoy whatever I'm creating, and when you're having fun, that's when you learn the most. And you can still create really beautiful stuff with these supplies. Some of my favorite sketch spreads incorporate paints and crayons that I've gotten from Walmart for super cheap. I've even found canvases and wood slices at places like Dollar General and Ross for a steal that I use for practice. I have yet to be so lucky, but apparently you can even find really inexpensive art supplies at thrift stores, so definitely check those out too if you're hunting for options that won't break the bank. Number 3 on my best purchases list is Render marker paper. I've noticed Render has gotten a lot of hype recently, and as someone who's been using it for years, I can honestly say it's well deserved. I personally use the 9x12 paper pad and just cut the paper down to whatever size I'm needing for whatever piece I'm working on. These pads come with 24 sheets of paper, but since you can use both sides, you can double that. Alcohol markers are one of my favorite mediums, and I've used them on all kinds of paper, including cheap marker paper. Render paper is leagues above the rest, as it's truly no-show, meaning that your markers will not bleed through to the other side. I've also noticed a huge difference in how markers lay down and blend on render paper compared to other marker paper, cardstock, and general sketchbook paper. Blending looks so much more smooth and is a lot easier to pull off. At around $15 a pop, the pads are a little on the pricey side, but if you're a marker enthusiast like me, they're well worth it. If you want footage of this paper in action, I have several videos where I've used it. I'll try to remember to leave a link to one of them somewhere around here. Number 4 on my list is probably one of, if not the cheapest thing. That is this little easel from Five Below. This little guy has been an absolute godsend. I did not expect to use it as much as I do. It was, of course, around $5, and it was worth every bit of that. This is what I use to hold my iPad when I film footage on Procreate. I also use it to prop up my iPad when I'm sitting on the couch or on my bed. One of my favorite things to do on days off is to lay in bed with the dogs in the morning and just doodle for a few hours before I start my day. This little easel has made that so much easier. Before, I was just propping my iPad up on a little pillow and it was absolutely killing my wrist. Not anymore. I will say that the build quality is a bit lacking, but I can't really fault it for that, being that it was $5. For one thing, the little nuts and bolts on the hinges have to be tightened every now and then. My husband and I both have one of these easels, and we've learned that the metal support bar at the back inevitably falls out at some point. There's an easy fix though, and that's to simply put some hot glue into the holes and secure the bar that way. With a few modifications, you can make this easel much more sturdy. It folds up easily, and it's small enough to be portable if you want to go to a coffee shop or something and draw without having to hunch over the table. Drawing has become a lot more ergonomic for me since getting this thing, and I love it. And the last thing on my list is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. This book has been out for a while, but I first heard about it about a year ago. It's a self-help type book geared toward artists who are struggling to be creative and gives you exercises to do and habits to build to get back into the creative mindset. I started reading this book when I was in the midst of an art slump, particularly as far as YouTube was concerned. This book helped me identify my pain points when it came to creating things and hit me with a lot of aha moments. It does have a spiritual aspect which some people might not vibe with, and I will admit I'm a little allergic to such things myself, but it wasn't overbearing and I was able to read past it and just absorb what the author was trying to say. This book inspired me to start journaling as well, which has helped my mental and artistic health. Even after finishing this book about 6 months ago, I'm still journaling every day, and it's helped make me more aware of my struggles so that I can work on them. It's also been immensely helpful with goal setting. If you're struggling with being creative, and especially with self-doubt and procrastination, this book is definitely a helpful read. It's so good. And that's everything I have on my list. I hope these items and my thoughts on them were helpful to you in some way. Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts one way or the other about any of these things I've discussed here. I'd love to know what y'all think. For the next video, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled creature art most likely, so if you're into that and you haven't already subscribed, I'd love to have you on board. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.